In the book, they talk about this study that was being done with rabbits. And there were control groups, and they were overfeeding the rabbits with terrible things to make their hearts get full of plaque and fat and stuff. And they noticed that one group of rabbits wasn't developing these negative conditions. And they couldn't figure it out. It was the same food. They were from the same genetic stream and everything like that. It was like, how are these rabbits improving as opposed to deteriorating? And what they discovered was the tech who was feeding the rabbits, she was petting them and cuddling them. And the result of that was that their hearts didn't get interfered with this bad diet. And that's astounding. That's really astounding how the behavior can change the physiology of what's going on with us. It's like the Epigenome Project, understanding that our genes aren't fixed, they're affected by the environment and by all of the practices that we do.
Hi, Envisionaires. Welcome to the EnvisionAir Podcast. This is the podcast where we envision living our best lives by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, community, and love. This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered to be medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice.
This podcast does not encourage or endorse any illegal activity.
We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liability that may arise from the information in this podcast.
The views explored in the podcast may not always be those of the host.
On today's episode, we're going to be in the book nook, focusing on the community pillar of the podcast, talking about all things kindness. And I'm super excited. We have Alan Questel, who wrote the book, Practice Intentional Acts of Kindness and Like Yourself More. Alan is an internationally renowned and respected Feldenkrais practitioner, trainer, and lecturer. He's taught over thousands of people actually in over 20 countries on 5 continents, including hospitals, colleges, universities, including Princeton University, the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology in California, and even Mother Teresa's Sishu, Bhavan in Calcutta, India. So I'm very excited that today we're going to be talking with Alan about the importance of being kind, including what benefits kindness can bring for ourselves and others, how we start to break through some of those negative unconscious patterns of being unkind to ourselves and to others, how we cultivate kindness on a daily basis, and how we can just generally bring kindness into our lives. So, very warm welcome, Alan. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and joining us all the way from New Mexico.
And thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time. So I think a great way for us to start this podcast is to talk about, why do we even need to care about kindness?
I'd be more worried if someone wasn't worried about kindness. But
Yeah.
but kindness, I'm always interested in things that are fundamental to human nature. Things that cross all cultures, that all of us can benefit from. And I would say that kindness is one of the most fundamental aspects of who we could be better at as being human beings, through generating more kindness towards ourselves, towards others, and to make the world a little bit of a better place than it is no matter what state it's in. It can always improve.
Yeah. And I think that's what you do so well in the book, because you talk about the kindness that not only we want to express to others, but also the kindness that we want to show to ourselves, essentially. Yeah. And I think that is so beautiful. So I would love to know, well, actually, I kind of already know, but I'd love for you to share with the listeners, what was the motivation behind kindness? I know you talked, there's some personal things that happened in your life that motivated that, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what motivated?
There are a few things, but I think one of the deeper things that motivated me was my father, who when I was younger, I was never very close to. We had a fine relationship, but it wasn't close. And then later on in life, he unfortunately ran out of money, and my brother and I had to support him, and we were both happy we could do that for him. And then he developed dementia. And we finally had to put him in a home, and it was a very nice place. And it was in Florida where he lived with my stepmother, and it was coming into the summer, and she was going back to New York to visit her family, kids and grandkids. And I realized he's going to be all alone. There's going to be no one to visit him. Mm-hmm. And so I started, I don't know where I got the idea, but I just started calling him every day. Mm-hmm. And for me, some kids and parents, that's usual. For me, it was not usual at all. And I started calling him every day for like 5 minutes, and I did that for 3 years. And it was not easy, meaning that I lived in California. He was in Florida at the time. There was a 3-hour time difference, which actually worked out well. But sometimes he would talk into the other end of the phone, and he'd put the phone down and walk around. He always knew who I was. Mm. And that action of calling him every day, like I said, I didn't look forward to it, but I did it. And then there were many days, of course, that I did look forward to it. And I found over time that was one of probably the biggest acts of kindness I'd had done in my life at that point. And I realized how we could all benefit from doing actions like that. And when I say actions like that, I'm specifically talking about ones that aren't so easy. You know, people think the idea of kindness, oh, it's a great thing. Sure, who doesn't want to be kinder? But in fact, to be kinder, not kind, kinder, we have to change something in ourselves. And often the change in ourselves is not so comfortable. Yes. So I think it can be a challenge to become kinder. And so thanks, Dad. That was a good one for me.
Well, and I think I remember at the beginning of, at the end of chapter 1, and again, I throughout the book, you offer the reader very useful exercises, almost like a kind of a list of things to reflect on. And in chapter 1, you talked about the difference of, it's almost like you started, I really like how you did this. And again, feel free to talk about this, but essentially it started with like, list some things that, you already do well in terms of kindness, and then you moved on gradually. And what was interesting was that little bit of now think about the people or the things that you just can't be kind to, and I found that really hard. Hard. But then what you did so brilliantly, and I think this is a really great exercise, maybe we can share with listeners, was you then went to a next step to maybe adjust that there was something in the mind that happened. Then we went back, and it was actually easier to at least envision being kinder to the people who I thought I couldn't be kind to. Do you remember that? So if you can kind of go through that, that was a beautiful exercise.
The thing is, because people imagine, I think they imagine the book to be, oh, okay, this is where I'm not kind. How can I be kinder? And I want to start with, where are you already kind? Right? That's a much better starting place to do something like that. And then, of course, it goes all the way to the extreme, as you mentioned, about all the people you could never be kind towards. And that's a big challenge. And I know for myself, there are people in my life that I feel like I could never be kind to them, but in fact, if we can turn that around and actually, I'm trying to remember how I wrote it in the book, because it's quite a while ago since I wrote it. The idea of making it somewhat reversible, right? That it's not something that you have to do, that you're going to consider doing. Yes. And to see if you play with the idea of all the other people you can be kind towards, then maybe you can open the door a little bit to the ones you can't imagine. And I'm not suggesting that the people who are really challenging for us that we have to be kind to, but we take on the consideration of it. At the very least, to become more compassionate towards who they are. Yes. Right? Because, all of us are as we are from our histories, for many different reasons. And it's so easy to judge someone and go, well, they're just a jerk, why would I want to be kind to them? But how did someone become a jerk? Now, that's a silly kind of question in a way, but in fact, it's the result of their circumstances.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't put us in a good place or put them in a good place to be judging them for that. And just to see can I feel a little bit kinder towards them? So that's another thing, is approximations of kindness, appropriate levels of challenge, and approximations.
Yes.
So that we're not trying to hug the person when we see them, but we're not trying to run away from them at the same time.
Yes. And okay, so I'm going to share something with you. So I practiced this today because unfortunately I was triggered by this person, and I didn't even see the person, but they came into my mind. Okay.
Yes.
And it's a person I actually don't even ever see, really. But I was reading the book, and I actually was trying to I was doing that exercise again, and I was like, who is it? So I pictured the person. All right. And I'm sharing this because I hope that the listeners, maybe they can do this. And I was like, oh, I hate this person, but I don't really. But I was like, I feel so much, because I try to think that I'm quite a nice person, and I go out of my way to help people. So when people are really mean, I'm like, you're just a nasty person. Anyway, right. So I imagine the person. And then in your book, you said something exactly like you said, the approximation. Don't be so... It doesn't mean you have to go and hug them. So I actually imagined being in an elevator with that person. Uh-huh. And instead of being hello, hi, as I normally would, because I'm excited to see someone, what I did was I turned to them and I smiled, and I gave them a fake smile, but at least I was nice. And then I was like, oh, okay, that's weird. But I was like, whatever, a fake smile is better than not smiling or being rude purposefully, right? And so then actually I felt like, oh my God, I was a little bit kind to that person. And it was almost like a micro kindness, and that was really helpful. And now when I think about that person, I don't feel as angry, which is so interesting. So that was because of your book and that exercise. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing about people like that, and we all have people in our lives like that. Some we don't see often, some we see frequently, but we carry them with us. And usually we carry a story around it, right? Or an event or something that happened. And I found for myself that what are the possibilities when I'm having that internal conversation? I can go, I don't really care. But then an hour later, it comes back. Or I hear their name at a party, someone mentions their name, and I go off on this story about them. And I realize that's actually kind of rehearsing and perpetuating that negative relationship. So either I can let it go. Not so easy, but it is possible. Or maybe I need to speak to someone, a counselor or someone, to find a way to navigate it in a better way, so that it's not part of my story. Mm-hmm. Or maybe if it's someone I see frequently, it's to take the courage to say, can we have an awkward conversation and try to work it out? Now, if they say no, the door's closed. That's fine. It's finished. We can that helps us let it go.
Yes.
Or maybe we can go through the conversation and find out there's a side to it that we didn't see or understand. Mm-hmm. And maybe, again, not become best buddies or anything like that, but for both of us to move on. So anytime I hear someone telling me a story about someone again, I go, you need to do something about that. As I've learned, I need to do something about that. I just had a relationship with someone who was working for me, and there was a bit of a bump. And I finally got to the place where it's more like, okay, I don't need to talk to them. But then the next day I was talking to another colleague about it, going blah, blah, blah. And they said, you need to talk to them. I said, you're right. And I did, and it worked out great.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, I did. I spent a half hour talking with the person, and it was like it was put aside. It was finished. And that's so much kinder to ourselves, carrying that story around and practicing again and again.
I 100% agree.
Be a colleague, it can be a parent, it can be a kid. I mean, there are things, and this is where I think we're all a little reticent to bump into someone. So many mistakes, we're not good at it. But the only way we get good at it, and this is something that I have to be very careful when I say this, But those people in my life who challenge me like that, those are my best teachers.
Yes.
If I can learn to be kinder, more compassionate, being able to listen to them more easily, I improve as the result of that.
Yeah, 100%. I think seeing it like a lesson, if you will, or an opportunity for growth, which is what you just described, is very beautiful. What happens if people just can't, like either, let's say they try to approach the person and the person just, they're not having it. And so essentially, how does someone, let's say, rewrite the script or that sort of negative rehearsal in their mind without the external validation of that person?
Well, the first thing is to become aware of it, as opposed to just spitting it out all the time, growling about it. If I can become aware of it and I engage with the person and say, can we talk about this? Now, it's very important to understand how we engage the person. Like if I have someone like that and I say, we need to talk, that's not setting a good foundation for a conversation. That already puts them on the defensive. Or if I start telling them what they're doing wrong, that's not going to leave someone open to anything. But if I say, I'm having this experience when we do this, and maybe you can help me figure out how not to have that experience. So it becomes about me. It's not about them or trying to change them. Because I'll be honest, the people who are often the most irritating, I'm not going to change them. And if they do change, it's going to happen over a long time. I tell a story in the book about my dad. When I told him I loved him, because my mother had passed away and we were watching TV and my dad, and I realized I never told him I loved him. I muscled up the courage to say, I waited for a commercial and I said, Dad, I want you to know I love you. And he went, I love you too. What's on channel 4? What's on channel 5? And I was like, oh my God, I was so angry and devastated. And about an hour later, I realized, wait a minute, I did this for me, not for him. And then, but a year later, he started on the phone. I'd say goodbye, and he'd go, goodbye, I love you. And I go, what? And so people do change.
Yes.
But it takes time and patience. And patience is a big part of any of these kind of negotiations that we have with people. If we expect them to change right away, no. But like you said, if the person say, I'm not up for this, that's a good answer. That clarifies the nature of our relationship. If it's a colleague at work, that can be a challenge because I may be running into them. But if it's a friend who says that, then I have to really consider, do I want this person as a friend?
100%.
I had another person a few years ago who I wanted to give feedback to. They were working for me. And I said, can I give you feedback? And I think I'm pretty good at that. We can always learn more. And they got furious with me about being evaluated. And I was like, whoa. I was surprised because I didn't see this or know this side of the person. But the result of that, I don't hire them anymore. We did have a subsequent conversation where I was told the only way I could engage with this person was this. And I thought, that's too many rules for me. I can't narrow it. We have to be able to make mistakes. And a good friend may get angry, but they'll tolerate it.
Well, some great advice. Great advice. And okay, so getting back to kindness then. Kindness, as I'd love to talk about the benefits because obviously being kind, I love the idea of this. I love the idea of your book. It's about empowering people to be kind to others, but also themselves. But what I loved when I was reading your book was the study that you shared about rabbits. And so please, can you share that with the listeners?
So
I think they would.
It's from another book called The Rabbit Effect. And of course, one of the research things I did for the book was to look for other books that actually had concrete activities that you could do to generate more kindness. Because a book about kindness is often about empathy or compassion, which is great, But how do you do it? How do you practice it? And this book is one of the books that has exercises, although I have to say they were a little bit grand for me. But in the book, they talk about this study that was being done with rabbits. And there were control groups, and they were overfeeding the rabbits with terrible things to make their hearts get full of plaque and fat and stuff. And they noticed that one group of rabbits wasn't developing these negative conditions. And they couldn't figure it out. It was the same food. They were from the same genetic stream and everything like that. It was like, how are these rabbits improving as opposed to deteriorating? And what they discovered was the tech who was feeding the rabbits, she was petting them and cuddling them. And the result of that was that their hearts didn't get interfered with this bad diet. And that's astounding. That's really astounding how the behavior can change the physiology of what's going on with us. It's like the Epigenome Project, understanding that our genes aren't fixed, they're affected by the environment and by all of the practices that we do. And so that word practice is, again, key to me. It's like, what can we do to change our physiology, our mentality, our emotional life? Because all of this reflects around our self-image, right? There's very few people I've met who say, well, I'm really not a kind person. And if they do, I'm a little surprised, because I think everyone's basically inherently kind, you know? So that group of rabbits was really lucky.
Yeah. I love that. So that's a real health benefit, if you will, to being kind, or I guess receiving the kindness. I wonder what would have been interesting is if they maybe measured, I don't know how, but the tech's health as well, because I wonder if it's almost reciprocal, right? If you're giving kindness, if you're getting it. And that's another question that I had for you. When I started reading the book, I was wondering, are people born kind, or is it a skill that we develop? And you mentioned that as well. So, and obviously, as I read through the book, I realized, oh yes, you are of the view that everyone is born kind, and it's a skill to develop. So can you talk to us a little bit about how we can develop that?
Oh, well, the how we go. Can I backtrack just a little bit and talk about if we're born kind? Because there have been studies shown that we are born kind.
Okay,
right?
Please tell us, yes.
That's something that's inherent in the nature of how infants respond to kindness and how they generate kindness. But if you watch it developmentally, it's kind of interesting, because you see kids, they start sharing things. And it's such it's such an open, authentic thing when you see a child I've had kids just give me something because they want, and I'm like, I'm so touched by that, you know. But then as they get a little older, they start taking things from each other, you know. So maybe we need to go through these different stages of doing something like this. But how we do it, I think the most important thing about how we practice generating more kindness is to choose an action that's small, that we can find an approximation of success. Right? Because most of us take on a task that's way too big, and it's out of reach, and it's daunting, and you give up, you know? But if you take something small, like in the book, I talked about something that was more about self-image and liking myself more, of when I was 19 and I moved out of my parents' house, and I had the brilliant realization that I'm no good at anything. I was 19. At 19, you're not old enough to be good at anything almost, you know? So I decided I was going to become good at one thing. And I just randomly picked brushing my teeth. I don't think I brushed my teeth well, but this was an activity that if I didn't do it well, no one would know, except the dentist, but he already knew, right? So that wasn't a problem. And I could practice it in my own time. And over time, I discovered that I could do this better. But what was really amazing was all the negative sabotaging behaviors I had started showing up around this little tiny thing. And so now I had to encounter parts of myself that was way beyond brushing my teeth,
Yes.
But it was something small like that. So choosing something small that maybe no one knows about, so they can't evaluate you, that you can develop over as much time as you want, and to give yourself that time as well. And that anything like that, and it can be just turning the lights out, or washing the dishes if you live with someone, or making the bed, or picking up your clothes, or just making coffee for someone in the morning instead of just for yourself. That these little things, they add up, you know? And I'm convinced that the biggest way that we can change ourselves is by starting small. And I can give you another example of liking ourselves more. Because for me, that's another very fundamental thing. And unfortunately, well, no, let me put this another way. Fortunately, I haven't met someone who doesn't want to like themselves more. Unfortunately, I don't meet enough people who really like themselves. And they're at all levels of success and achievement in life. So it's not based on any of that. There's still an internal feeling of, I don't like my... Well, once in Norway, I was teaching, and I said, so, because when I talk about liking yourselves more, because it's what I teach people how to do. And I do it primarily through movement in a way that if you move in a way that you like the way it feels, you're practicing liking yourself more. And it's very interesting, because just moving like that is separate from any other outcomes that we normally have about liking ourselves. So when I bring up this idea, I say, wait, I have to stop. Is there anyone here who doesn't want to like themselves more? And one woman raised her hand and said, I already like myself. And I said, that's great, but that's not the question. The question is, would you like to like yourself more? And she went, okay, which I thought was a funny response. But in fact, that's important to all of us. So this idea of moving in a way that we like the way it feels, and I'm not talking about dancing through the streets or anything. If you think about it, well, I can ask you a question, but maybe it's in the books, you probably know the answer, so I'll just ask it, okay? So when do you decide to get comfortable, right? And so the dominant answer that people have is, when I'm uncomfortable. Now, if you think about that, that's a crazy criteria. That's cuckoo. A dog doesn't wait till they're uncomfortable, or a cat doesn't wait till they're uncomfortable, or a child doesn't wait till they're uncomfortable. They're monitoring themselves through their sensations and quality of experience. And so if something's not right, you see a kid drawing, right? And they're in this position and there and there, and they never get up and go, Mommy, I have a stiff hip, because they're regulating themselves, right? And so we can look at how can we be more comfortable, but then we can also look at pleasure, like when are we allowed to find pleasure in our lives? Well, if you add up the hours, you'd be lucky to come up with 3 or 4 hours a day. So where's the other 20 hours, right? We're not paying attention to ourselves in this way. And we've learned how to ignore ourselves as adults. Because a kid, like I said, they regulate themselves by how they feel internally, which can be extremes. They start to cry or throw a tantrum. So then they have to learn to contain themselves. But then it goes to such an extreme that don't move, don't get your dress or your suit dirty, or you can't do that. And so we start to hold ourselves, and we start to ignore ourselves. So as adults, we need to start to pay more attention to our sensory experience. And we can start by saying, I'm going to, a few times a day, move in a way that I like the way it feels. How does that enter in through the back door? When I train people in the work I do, the Feldenkrais method, which my trainings are 4 years long. So I'm with these people for a long time. And what I found is that moving in a way that you like the way it feels enters into the back door. And probably one of the best moments I've had a number of times now is when I'd graduate people, and I'd call them up and give them their certificate and give them a hug. And so many people would whisper in my ear, I like myself more. And I thought, and in fact, so I train people to become Feldenkrais practitioners. That's my first job in engaging them. Dr. Feldenkrais was the one asked to explain the method in one sentence, and he said, know thyself. So that's my second job, to help people get to know themselves more. So if someone does a 4-year training and they don't learn the method, but they know themselves better, it was worth it.
100%.
Then, if they like themselves more, that really makes it beneficial, right?
Yeah.
And this whole idea of liking ourselves more, if I bring it back to kindness, and this was another connection that in addition to my father, one day I did something kind to someone, I didn't remember what it was, and in the next moment, I realized, I like myself more. That when I did an act of kindness, it reflected back on me. And I'm not suggesting in any way that we just do kind acts to pat ourselves on the back, but that was the loop that made it really useful from intrapersonal to interpersonal.
Yes, yes.
Something that makes a difference for me and for the world, but it's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's not.
Not to be discouraging.
No. Well, when I was reading your book, there was that. Okay, so there was two things. So when you were talking about the emotional, I guess, understanding sensory, and you did, again, you kind of explained that in part 1 of the book, where you said there was like 3 steps. It's not only understanding the emotions and like what's going on in the mind and the emotions, but then it's also sensory, which was an interesting element. I never thought about it that way. And I thought that's quite profound, because if you're asking people to, for example, revisiting people who maybe, grate you or upset you or trigger you, whatever it is, and all of a sudden it's being aware not only of this, or like the tightness in the body, or the anger, or your throat getting tight. It's also talking about the scent, like what's happening in your whole body. And that was really fascinating. I just wanted to mention that as another element to it, processing everything and being more self-aware, which I thought was really nice.
Yeah. Our sensations kind of rule us, but we don't know it. Yeah. Right? A child knows it. I mean, a child is ruled by their sensations. And whether it's an infant who's hungry or has a wet diaper who cries because of the sensations. But then as adults, we have so many thoughts connected to it, and they're hard to differentiate, to take them apart, to not ignore our feelings, but to act in a different direction, which is outside of our self-image.
Right. And on that point, that's something I also wanted to talk to you about, because we talked about, so the self-love and doing what we can in ourselves to love ourselves and to be kind to ourselves. But what if you have these past experiences? And that's really it's essentially like people, whether when you were a child or experiences have happened that are very negative, and they shape our sense of self-worth, our sense of love and compassion towards ourselves. Right. What can people start doing? I've heard sometimes like there's like mirror work and different things that you can do, but do you have any exercises?
I think there are many things that we can do that's out there, and some of them work and some of them don't work, actually. Like I've been in therapy many times, and I found over time that often the therapist colluded with me.
What do you mean colluded?
Colluded, that we investigated my problem. Here's an example, or a general example. So I have this issue, right? And I go to a therapist. And then I don't want to negate therapists. I think they're great. I've learned a lot from them. Yeah. So I go to this therapist, and we start investigating this issue that I have, and we find out that this is an issue that I had with my mother and my father. And I go, oh, good, now I'm starting to understand it. And as we go deeper into it, I find that it's not only with my mother and my father, it's with my cousins and aunt and uncles. It's my whole family system. Oh, now I'm really starting to understand it. Not only do I have it with my family system, but I do it with my friends, and I do it with my colleagues at work. And what I'm doing is embedding this understanding in every area of my life. It's not changing anything.
Right.
So how do I change that? Yeah. And that's where the idea of simple processes that
Yeah.
can change things over time are the most beneficial, because that big thing is too big. Who doesn't have a history?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Now, some histories are pretty horrible, right?
Mhm.
And you know, it's not to minimize the effect or the extent of someone's severity of history that develops in who they are. But then it becomes, if you think about it, that's trying to get away from my past, which is a normal thing. But in fact, that's different than going towards who I want to become.
Mm.
And the clearest example I give you that, I think it's in the book. It's my uncle who was a dentist. Now, when I started my practice in New York, I had a waiting list. I mean, I was really successful quickly, and he was coming to me for sessions. I didn't charge him anything, but I think he thought he was helping me out. It was a kind act on his part that was taking money out of my pocket, actually, because I could have seen someone else. And he was a dentist, twisted to one side, and he had back pain. And every session that I worked with him, because I work with people in all kinds of physical challenges, and he felt better. And but the next week it was back. And then, I don't know, 4 or 5 sessions into it, I said, "Do you like golf?" And he went, "Oh, yeah, I love golf." And I said, "What do you want to improve in your golf?" So we started looking at that, and we worked with that through his physicality, and his back pain went away. What's the difference there? Well, the difference is back pain is something I want to get away from. Reasonable idea. But playing golf better is something I want to go towards. The focus is really different, because if I want to get away from something, I actually attach myself to it.
Yes.
You know, if I don't like that plant back there, I could be getting on a plane in a couple of days going, "No, where's that plant?" I'm wondering about it all the time. It's like the stories we talked about in the beginning.
Yes.
You know? And so to get away from something is certainly possible, but it's a bigger challenge. But going towards something is a much more positive focus.
Love that.
And I think that kind of can override some of our history or give us a different relationship with it.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like I went to a Tony Robbins event last year, and it was so great. It was Unleash Your Power, and it was such a great event. But what he said, and I have heard this before, but it really resonated because that environment. But he said, where your attention goes, your energy flows. Right. Yeah. And I try and remind myself of that often. So exactly, like if I focus on that person who triggers me, that is the feelings. It's going to evoke everything. It's almost that, you know, and so that's very good advice of trying to look forward rather than in the rearview mirror.
I have to tell you a funny story about Tony Robbins.
Oh, tell me. Yeah. Okay.
This many years ago in the 80s. And I had a client who was a graphic designer, and she was kind of mopey. And one day she came in and she was sitting up straight, and she got 3 new jobs. And I said, "What happened to you?" And she said, "I did the firewalk, Fear into Power, with Tony Robbins." And I thought, "Oh, that sounds interesting." I thought, I'm going to try it. I figured I can deduct it, you know. So I go to this thing, and basically it was like a 5-hour trance induction.
Right.
And at the end, you'd walk through this thing of maybe, I don't know, 8 meters of hot coals.
Yes.
And people would get through it, and they'd go, "Yahoo! Fear into power. I can do anything I want." And I went through it, and I went, "I can do anything I want." And then the next thought was, "What do I want to do?" And I got depressed and got into a taxi and went home. And I was like, because that's a tough question. What do I want? Right? And so I would say, if someone doesn't want to have more kindness, don't read my book.
Right.
It's not worth it, right? You have to want to do it, right? And anything that you do, and the want means it's a lot of hard work, you know? It's something that you got to keep persevering at and finding ways to circumvent the challenges and appreciate the small changes that grow us over time like that. So, yeah, 100%. I agree. Where the attention goes, the energy goes. Yeah.
Love that. So was your firewalk with Tony Robbins, or was it a different? Oh, it was. Oh, amazing. Yeah. I did the firewalk too.
This guy is an amazing presenter. And I have mixed feelings about him in some ways, but man, that guy could really. Do you ever see the movie Shallow Hal?
I have. I feel like I've seen bits of it, but not to speak about it. Why?
It's a brilliant film. Tony Robbins is in it with Jack Black.
Okay.
And I won't tell you about it.
I'm gonna have to watch it.
Everyone has to see it. It's a really touching, deeply moving film, actually.
And it's presumably it talks about something about the mind in some way.
I would say it's more about Jack Black's idiotic habits around women and what Tony Robbins does with him to go beyond that.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe I'll watch it tonight then.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So getting back to kindness.
Yeah,
So
yes.
one of the things, obviously we're wrapping up now too, but I guess people are listening, and I hope that they have taken the message away of the importance of being kind, not only to yourself, but to others. And I did, before I got into this question, I wanted to also tell you, because I saw Deepak Chopra a few months ago, and he was talking about this idea of like, we are all connected and we're all kind of one consciousness, essentially, which I thought, and when I was reading your book, it actually made me think of that, because you also talk about this idea of kindness, connectiveness, and it really, so I just want to share that with you, because I thought that was really, really beautiful, the way you evoked that, like essentially being kind to someone is also being kind to yourself, and we're all just connected.
Can I interrupt just for a second?
No, that's it. Yeah.
About being kind to ourselves. And I have to tell you that when I was writing the book and I got to the part of being kinder to ourselves, I got blocked for 5 years.
Yes.
And I thought I was pretty good at it. And I went, no. And that's a much harder task.
Yeah.
To be kind to others, it's actually easier. To be kind to ourselves, that's where the real work happens. And if we can do that, then we can be kinder to others too. So.
Yeah. And how did you, for the listeners saying, and how did you get over that? If it, it took, obviously it's a 5-year journey for you. How was it? Just a lot of self-work and in different modalities?
It was a lot of self-work, but it was mostly, again, catching the moment where I could observe what I was doing. That's the hardest part. How do I interrupt, not just act compulsively, but catch it and go, what am I doing here? Why aren't I taking more time off? Why do I put work before anything else? And when my friends go, I can't call, I'm busy working. And I go, am I really that busy working? So I had to evaluate things. I think one of the better examples was, in the chapter on generosity, when I talk, one of the exercises is tipping a little bit more. If you give $5, give $6. If you give $10, give $12. And I was out to dinner with some friends, and it was a local place, and I picked up the check. It was $70, and I normally leave 20%, so I thought, around $85, and I had a $100 bill. And I said, I'm going to give the $100 bill. And in the next moment, I just clutched, like, I can't do that. And I went, wow, this is weird. Here I am promoting these ideas, and I'm struggling. And I did give the $100. And when I left the restaurant, the waitress stopped me and said, you just made my night. So something like that helps me do things better, right? Yeah. And the same thing towards ourselves as well. Taking better care of ourselves in all ways.
100%. Okay, so what are the 3 things that listeners can start to do today to cultivate the kindness in their day-to-day life? And I know you already mentioned some of them, but if you can just give us 3 kind of go-to advice, step by step.
Sure.
Yeah.
First thing is listen. Listen to yourself. Listen in a kind way, and listen to others. Give people your attention, even if it's just for a moment, but really listen, not trying to respond or to tell them what, just taking in. People appreciate being listened to. We all need to be listened to more. Second thing, find something small that you can practice, right? That doesn't interfere with your day, that isn't the end of the world if you don't do it, that something that over time can grow a different quality in yourself. And the third thing is, I'll go back to what I said before, find some times in the day where you move in a way that you like the way it feels, to practice that, right? Because I believe, and I've seen, that changes us. That changes our self-image through the back door. And then if we like ourselves more, we can like others more too and be kinder.
It's perfect. Beautiful. Well said. Thank you so much, Alan. Right. Well, before we wrap up, we have the EnvisionAir questionnaire. And this is a fun feature of the podcast where we ask guests to reflect on their past, present, and future. So are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Looking back on your past, what advice would you give your 15-year-old self and why?
My 15-year-old self, I would get, stop worrying about what other people think about you. It doesn't matter what they think about you, right?
Yeah.
What do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And think about yourself that way.
Perfect. Great advice. And reflecting on your present, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world tonight, who would it be?
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
Yeah, I love him. He's so great.
I mean, I was an actor before I did the work I do now, but not because of him as an actor, because of the way he promotes kindness. I find him a really interesting person like that, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, I'd like to just have a conversation with him about kindness, his insights and what he would change as a 15-year-old boy and all of those things too. Yeah.
That's great. That's such a good one. Nobody's ever said that so far. So that's a first. And I think that's a great one. And I follow him on Instagram. And he just does such funny little skits too. He's so nice. Anyway. Okay. So what's one goal you would like to achieve in the next 5 years?
Oh, I know exactly what that is. 5 years may be a bit of a challenge, but as I said before, I'm interested in the moment that can bring us to evaluating ourselves to make a change. And when I say the moment, what I'm talking about is not awareness. Awareness happens, I have to have a moment that brings me into awareness. What's that moment that wakes us up? So Frankl or Feldenkrais, people talk about this pause. And so that's something that really interests me, not just as an idea, but how can I help people create the pause in their everyday lives to create the awareness, to move their attention, to change themselves.
Love that. Would you encourage them to do that? Or, well, like I know you have talked about doing meditation. You used to do it quite a lot. Yeah. Or is it through the Feldenkrais method?
I don't know. I'm looking for a third avenue. I'm looking for one that, because those are, to engage in any of those processes, there's already an awareness of wanting to change or do something. I'm talking about what's the moment where I go, oh, I need to change something. How do I create that moment of, oh? And like I'm thinking about it as another book, and the working title now is It's All About the Pause. So how do we create the pause? That's what I'm interested in. And I don't have the answer right now. Yeah.
No. Very cool. Well, we look forward to hearing about that, Alan. Well, thank you so much for being on the EnvisionAir podcast. You have been so generous with your advice and the book. I felt so much like love and generosity with trying to get your message across for all of us to be kinder and to embrace kindness towards ourselves and to others. So thank you for being on the podcast. Now, if listeners want to connect with you, I know you've sent me various different links. I'll put it all in the show notes. But if do you want to tell anyone specifically, is there the website? Is that the best place, or is it Instagram?
Well, the website's probably the best place. You can contact me there. It's practicing-kindness.com. And all the information about the book and the sample worksheet is in there, and testimonials and other podcasts and stuff. So there's a lot there. And you can contact me. And if you don't get an answer back within 3 days, I didn't get it. So I'm really fast with emails and stuff. And the book's available on Amazon as a paperback. I like to say as a Kindle instead of a Kindle. And also it's also there as an audiobook too, which I read. So
Amazing.
And thanks so much for having me on your show. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Me too. Well, whenever you come to London, you're going to have to let me know. But thank you so much. And we're sending you so much love. And thank you again for everything, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you hit subscribe and check out this video here.